The signing of Miles Norris makes it clear that Brad Stevens does not trust the current Celtics bench, and this move may say much more about the team's planning than the official narrative is willing to admit. While the public discourse points to Norris coming in on a two-way contract with an experimental role, the decision raises questions about the internal evaluation of the roster. Why would the Celtics bring in another specialist in shooting for a team that already leads the NBA in three-pointers, if they truly trusted the potential of the current bench? The answer may lie in the inconsistency of some of the second-unit pieces. Sam Hauser, despite solid regular season numbers, has yet to prove himself as a reliable player in clutch games. Oshae Brissett brings defensive impact, but falls short offensively. Svi Mykhailiuk, on the other hand, has never managed to earn consistent minutes. The impression left is that none of them offer a complete package of shooting and defense, exactly the profile Norris brings. More than just a simple gamble, this signing could be a clear signal that Brad Stevens is already thinking about drastically shortening the rotation for the playoffs. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Is the Celtics roster as deep as previously thought? The regular season serves to give minutes to role players, but the postseason tends to expose the weaknesses of those who can't maintain their level under pressure. Norris's arrival also suggests a shift in the front office's approach, as they seem willing to test all possible options before the decisive phase. Instead of blindly relying on the depth of the roster, Stevens might be sending a clear message to the group. Those who don't perform will be left behind. What few are discussing is how this move could impact the locker room. Bringing in a rookie in March, especially on a team fighting for the title, is not common. Will Hauser, Brissett, and Svi see this as a challenge to raise their game, or as a sign of distrust coming directly from the top? The lingering question is whether this late bet on Norris is just an attempt to find a complementary piece, or if it's a quiet warning that the Celtics bench could be the weak link in their quest for back-to-back championships. The obsession with three-pointers is making the Celtics ignore other more urgent needs, and this philosophy might be the detail that separates a historic team from a major disappointment. The arrival of Miles Norris seems to further reinforce the current identity of the franchise. But is this fixation on shooters masking problems that could cost them dearly in the playoffs? The narrative that the Celtics are an offensive machine holds up in the regular season, but recent NBA history shows that playoffs are decided by defense, physicality, and adjustments. The Denver Nuggets and Milwaukee Bucks weren't champions just because they shot better. They won because they dominated the paint, imposed their physicality, and had players capable of changing the game defensively. The choice of Norris seems to follow the same logic that the Celtics have adopted for years: accumulate shooters to spread the floor and generate more offensive volume. But how many times has this approach failed in crunch time? In 2022, Boston lost to the Golden State Warriors because they couldn't handle the physical pressure from Draymond Green and Kevin Looney in the paint. In 2023, they were overwhelmed by the Miami Heat with a shorter rotation, but a much more physically intense one. Today, the Celtics lead the NBA in three-point attempts, but rank just 17th in points in the paint. And even though they have an elite defense, the dependence on Kristaps Porzingis as the sole rim protector is a huge risk, especially considering his injury history. When Porzingis is off the court, the Celtics become a small, vulnerable team, something few are talking about. What's troubling about this move is the lack of balance. If Brad Stevens just wanted more depth, why not pursue a more physical wing or a center to protect the rim? Why not test a player with a more defensive profile, especially knowing that the paint could be the team's biggest weakness in the postseason? The signing of Norris might make sense within the system, but it also exposes a concerning stubbornness from the front office. Is the Celtics front office trying to win the NBA as if it's still 2018, when small ball and spacing were the path to a title? The league has changed. The Denver Nuggets showed in 2023 that dominating the paint is still the safest recipe for winning. The Miami Heat, despite not having a great roster, eliminated Boston last season by betting on physicality, defense, and rebounding. Everything the Celtics seem to be ignoring Another point that's rarely discussed is the psychological impact of this philosophy. When a team is built to live or die by three-pointers, as the Celtics have done, it inevitably becomes more emotionally fragile in close games. That's exactly what we saw in 2022 and 2023. When the shots stopped falling, the team simply collapsed. The most curious thing is that the Celtics roster already has pieces to build a dominant defense. Derek White, Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown form a perimeter that can suffocate any offense. But instead of reinforcing this identity, the front office seems more concerned with stacking shooters to ensure they succeed on hot nights, as if the playoffs were just a more intense version of the regular season. The big question is the Celtics building a team to dominate the regular season or to survive in the playoffs? The arrival of Norris is yet another indication that Brad Stevens hasn't learned the lessons from the past. The strategy of betting everything on three-point volume might win games in January and February, but will it work in May and June? When the game slows down, defenses tighten, and physicality becomes the deciding factor. Miles Norris could be a bet for the future, or just another Sam Hauser on the shelf of disposable shooters the Celtics have been stacking up in recent years. At first glance, the comparison with Hauser makes perfect sense. Both arrived without much hype, carrying the same profile: tall wings with reliable shooting mechanics and solid three-point numbers. But is Boston really betting on discovering a hidden gem, or just repeating a formula that works in the regular season but dissolves when the playoffs begin? The Celtics' recent track record shows a clear pattern. The franchise has built a culture of specialists, but few of these players manage to survive when the game tightens. Sam Hauser is a textbook example, brilliant against lower-level teams, practically invisible in decisive series. Luke Cornett does his job in the regular season but becomes irrelevant in the playoffs. Zvi Mikhailiuk barely sees the court. Peyton Pritchard, another volume shooter, only remains in the rotation because he brings energy and defense, something Norris doesn't offer. This conveyor belt mentality of producing shooters might seem smart on paper, but in practice, it's shown its limitations. Today's NBA values spacing and shooting, but the playoffs are about survival and about who can maintain their level when the game turns into a physical war. Brad Stevens himself has felt this firsthand in 2018, 2022, and 2023. The question no one is asking is, why do the Celtics keep insisting on a formula that has already proven insufficient in the decisive moments? Miles Norris is just another product of this obsession. If he follows Hauser's trajectory, great. But does that really solve anything for the Celtics in a series against Milwaukee or Miami? Fans need to ask themselves, what matters more to a championship team? Having another efficient shooter in the regular season or someone capable of staying on the floor in the clutch minutes of the postseason? His signing raises an uncomfortable question about the front office's vision. Stevens seems more focused on building a team that wins in March than one that survives in June. Norris, just like Hauser, will likely help inflate the Celtics' offensive stats during the regular season. But what happens when opposing defenses start hunting these players in the pick and roll? When the game slows down and every possession becomes a physical battle, what holds more value? A 40% three-point specialist, or someone capable of guarding multiple positions and impacting the game in different areas? The harsh reality is that the Celtics have been building a culture of disposable role players. They're pieces that make noise in the regular season, but become irrelevant in the most crucial moments. In 2022, Hauser was glued to the bench in the playoffs. In 2023, the rotation was shortened to the point where he didn't even leave the bench in the Eastern Conference Finals. And now, in 2025, will Norris's fate be any different? The signing of Miles Norris could be a move to pressure Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. This is, without a doubt, the most controversial theory surrounding the Boston Celtics' latest move. And precisely because of that, it's the one that deserves the most discussion. In a franchise that has always preached stability and patient building around its stars, a seemingly low-profile signing could carry subliminal messages far deeper than they appear. After all, why bring in another player specialized in long-range shooting when the roster already has a rotation full of efficient shooters like Sam Hauser, Peyton Pritchard, and even Al Horford? The answer might lie between the lines. And perhaps it's a direct message to the two pillars of the franchise. It's no secret that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown carry the weight of being the stars who brought the Celtics back to the top of the NBA. But it's also no secret that, in the most tense moments, both have already fallen short in terms of offensive efficiency. The history is there to prove it. The 2022 Conference Finals against the Miami Heat, Game 6 against the Golden State Warriors in 2022, and even during the 2024 championship run, when the team's offense stalled in several decisive games, especially in the hands of its main stars. Could Brad Stevens, with his always meticulous approach, be sending a clear signal to the duo? If you're not efficient from the perimeter, we'll always have more shooters ready to take up space in the rotation. This move opens up a delicate discussion about the balance of power within the franchise. As much as Tatum and Brown are the faces of the Celtics, it's not absurd to imagine that Stevens is already laying the groundwork for a subtle shift in the team's hierarchy. What if this signing is the first step toward transforming the Celtics into a team where no one is untouchable, not even the max contract players? Another possible reading is that the front office might be tired of waiting for Tatum and Brown to become the ruthless closers everyone projected. Perhaps Stevens has already accepted that neither of them will ever be the kind of superstar capable of dominating a series alone like Curry, Durant, or Giannis. In that scenario, the idea would be to surround them with as many specialists as possible, turning the team into a collective machine where the stars carry less individual burden and the supporting cast fills the gaps during cold stretches. The question is, wouldn't that be a way of admitting that Tatum and Brown, even at their peak, still aren't the players the Celtics once believed they would become? If this theory holds any truth, it reveals a silent crack in the relationship between the roster and the front office. After all, what message does it send to two stars who have just won their first career title and signed the largest extensions in franchise history? Does the Celtics organization truly believe in the duo to lead a dynasty? Or has it already started building a plan B? Even if no one has the courage to admit it publicly, this type of tension rarely surfaces in well-managed franchises, but it's enough to remember how Danny Ainge handled Isaiah Thomas or how the front office treated Rajon Rondo at the end of his tenure. The Celtics have a cold, calculated history when they sense a cycle is nearing its end.